Hey everyone, this is Ben Cecchini, founder of Give and Grow, here with another episode of the Give and Grow podcast. For those of you that are new to this show, this is our social emotional learning series where we're breaking down things around mental health, around social skills, emotional intelligence, and regulation, all these different areas with some really awesome professionals in the field. Today we have Jennifer Russell, school counselor, certified school counselor with her master's in education out of Richmond, Texas. So Jennifer, so nice to have you. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great, and I just want to thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and speak about, these issues that are on our minds and on our kids' minds every day.
Exactly. Yeah. So appreciative of you and your time today and excited to dive into these questions. And really, these are kind of like I mentioned, we're diving into all the areas of mental health, emotional health, and specifically targeting or speaking to parents so that they can support their kids with these skills at home and maybe even learn a little bit about how these skills are being taught in the classroom, especially if they're from the Texas, around Richmond, or the whole entire state, or around the country elsewhere. So Jennifer, just to kick things off, what are some of the core components or competencies of social emotional learning that parents should be aware of?
I think the biggest component of social emotional learning is that no two kids are alike. And I see this not only at school with the elementary campus that I service, but also with my own kids. My mom has always told me the adage, you can have a bazillion kids and none of them, even identical twins, will not function the same way. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think just understanding that, we go to the pediatrician and take our kids to the doctors annually for their well checks, and they have a set of guidelines that your kids should be at, right? And my kids were never at the height or the weight area. And that was
Mm-hmm.
always concerning as a parent, right? Because we go to doctors or mental health care providers or maybe a counselor, and we expect our kids to be developing at the same rate. And even if they're not, if they're a little lower or a little higher than where they need to be in those areas, that's okay. And I think as a
Mm-hmm.
parent, knowing that and knowing our kid well enough to be able to gauge that is the most critical component, because we can find a lot of information, right? We
Mm-hmm.
can find, I'm so happy to see all the new information on social media about, ADHD is a really big one right now because they just had some updates in the diagnostic book, the DSM-5, on how we gauge that, and they changed some of the age limits and the requirements. And for parents that are listening, that's kind of like the guidebook that lets us know, as counselors or therapists, like what type of criteria should the child or the individual, now it's a young adult up to age 17 we can diagnose,
Mm-hmm.
um, what type of criteria should they meet? Is it happening in more than one area or not? And with those changes comes a lot of information. So we see things on outlets on social media. I've seen a ton through LinkedIn. And I want to caution parents that although the sharing of this information is super essential, you need to be a good reader and a fact checker, because not everything that you see and hear
Mm-hmm.
that we're going to use from that parent perspective is going to be helpful and accurate. So a lot of times I'm seeing information that is truthful in a portion and then it's expanded. So, like, we hear a lot of vocabulary that we may not be familiar with. It's coming now more commonplace. So a great example is a narcissist, right? And a description of that. That is an actual mental diagnosis that you can get,
Mm-hmm.
but we use the word while speaking and on social media quite flamboyantly. We give it to a lot of people. Like, if somebody's really rude, you're like, oh, they're a narcissist, right? If they're gaslighting
Mm-hmm.
you, oh, they're a narcissist. So I want to caution parents to be very careful that although we're sharing and there are wonderful platforms such as this, it's a great platform to speak to people who have some background on it. We want to
Mm-hmm.
fact check the things too, because,
Mm-hmm.
just like anything else, we put our perception into
Yep.
what we're learning and hearing and saying. And so as a parent, I think, as to circle back, those two main components are knowing your child and knowing that it's okay not to be on whatever the general track is, and
Mm-hmm.
then making sure we're fact checking when we're gathering information wherever we're getting it from.
Mm-hmm.
I like to, even for myself, I like to look to see who it is, who the author is, or who the person speaking is, and check their credentials. It's okay to do that.
Right.
We're encouraged, like when I went through my master's program in counseling, they even tell you, all counselors should have a counselor that they go and speak to and unload and
Mm-hmm.
discuss with. But they said check and ask for credentials. Ask to see if the counselor or therapist that you're taking to your child to outside of school, do they specialize in your age group? Do they specialize in
Mm-hmm.
play therapy? Because all of those are different things, and they may not have it posted after their name. Um, and I know I talked to you in Texas, there's a specific order we have to rank our
Right.
credentials in, and not all states have that. We're not
Mm-hmm.
all under the compact yet for counseling, where we all
Mm-hmm.
get to practice in all different states. So each state has different regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So those are things that I didn't know before I ventured into my educational journey.
Right.
So as a parent, I would not have known that. I would not have felt comfortable questioning somebody who I thought was an authority on a subject, like,
Mm-hmm.
what are your credentials? Do you have experience in this? Are you trained? So I want to let parents know that it's okay to ask,
Yeah.
because it is a learning environment. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's, we get scared sometimes. And especially like in my work in the schools, when I talk to parents, we get scared. We get scared of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
We get worried that somebody's going to label our child and that label is going to stick with them.
Mm-hmm.
I want parents to feel comfortable and to know that the support system that is available is a wonderful thing if you utilize it, but you
Mm-hmm.
have to ask the questions and be okay asking them, right, before you
Mm-hmm.
venture into that realm.
Yeah, I really appreciate this, and this is a new topic that we haven't really discussed the on the show yet. The fact checking, the being comfortable, kind of checking somebody on their credentials, and asking those potentially uncomfortable questions, but not only in this space of mental health support, seeking mental health support, but I think elsewhere in our lives, like that is such a powerful thing. Like you can step outside your comfort zone in that way, and it's only gonna benefit you. And if somebody gets upset about asking for the credentials, you might get a good viewpoint as well of just like what you might be getting into if you partner with that person for support. So I just really appreciate that, and I was actually going to follow up on that idea of fact checking. Like, what are your go-to things? Is there anything else that you do as a practice that kind of helps you potentially get to the actual meat, the actual facts in this mental health space, other than checking the credentials of the people you're collaborating with?
I definitely think word of mouth is a huge indicator. And you also have to talk to your kids as well. Like I have tried as a young adult, or I guess I'm middle aged now, so I have to say as a middle aged adult, I've tried multiple therapists, and I have found one that I really liked. But insurance is a wonky thing when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
mental health. And so, in the independent field, when you're using your insurance to try to provide some type of, help with the payments and cost, you're limited. So
Mm-hmm.
talking to other people and finding out who they liked, that's always my number one in the door. And then beyond that, talking to their billing department, because some of them will bill independently, some of them do these like crazy billing systems that they do it by month. It's called a super bill, and then you have to submit it. But asking them those things up front, and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of them will work with you. Like there's quite a few counselors that I've seen in the private sector that will work on like a sliding scale. And
Okay.
so for somebody who's got, limited financials, and, I mean, I have a full-time job, but I'm raising two kids. That's tight when you're paying for insurance and trying to cover
Mm-hmm.
that. So they'll work with me on things that I can, work out on payment plans and things. They do have the
Right.
ability to do that in some cases. When you're talking about your kids counselor at school, you don't have an option. It's usually the state guideline is 1 to 350 students, and
Okay.
I'm on a campus. We're a hyper growth district, and so I'm 1 to 650.
Wow.
So they don't get a choice. They get me, and that's it.
Right.
If they want to
Right.
talk to a counselor, but we're not there for the therapeutic long haul. We're there
Mm-hmm.
for anything that the family needs, anything that the student needs. So if you're looking outside of that, I found my children's counselors through a program that the school set them up with. It was an
Yes.
outside source. It was people they had. We tried multiples after that because this individual left and went to a private practice. I found her and tracked her down because I went and checked with my kids. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what's the difference? What's the difference between, the first therapist you had and the second one? And they're like, well, we just have a relationship with her. That
Mm-hmm.
was enough for me, because I
Right.
think that's the bigger piece. You can understand why other people like an individual and why they feel comfortable sharing their
Mm-hmm.
stories, because it's got to be, a network of honesty.
Yep.
You have to feel comfortable, and for my kids it was that relationship, and you can't fabricate that. You
Yep.
can't create it. You can work really hard to try to get there, but some people you just click with. And for
Mm-hmm.
them, that's what they did. So I will go the extra mile, because they're more likely to tell her information than they were the other therapist they were working with, because they've got that bond. So I
Yeah.
really think asking, and no, trusting your gut. People always
Mm-hmm.
tell you, yeah, you get the gut intuition, but for these types of things we do. And it's
Mm-hmm.
okay to ask for a second opinion.
Yep.
We spoke about the credentials, but you wouldn't, if you were diagnosed with a terminal illness, you would not accept that from the one individual. We would
Right.
hope that in the medical profession you would go seek a second opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that. You can try out different therapists. Just attempt to do that and be forthcoming. Say, hey, I'm not settled yet. I'm going
Right.
to go try a different one. Because what happens, sometimes therapists get, they kind of tighten their reins, right? Because we want to help everyone. So, like, from a school counseling standpoint, I will share with any therapist that calls me and contacts me, as long as I have parent permission to share that student information out.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're bound by confidentiality. Sometimes, if you're dealing with multiple therapists, that's competing information, right? You wouldn't go to two heart specialists consistently. You
Mm.
might go to
Uh-huh.
get a second opinion, so that's okay. But when you're in the world of therapy, it runs very similar to a medical, profession. So if you
Okay.
don't like the diagnosis, or you don't agree with it, or you don't feel the path, maybe they practice, behavioral therapy, and that's not something you're
Mm-hmm.
interested in. Maybe you want, solution focused. And so you could try a different person. There might even be one, if they're working in a conglomerate, that you can ask about. So just, not, we spoke, not being afraid to ask, not being afraid to
Mm-hmm.
challenge, but also being forthcoming, because it is a relationship built on trust. And if the
Right.
trust isn't there, and you're like, oh, I'm just going to keep them, but I'm going to try another one, that doesn't do anyone any good.
Right, right. And yeah, there's a lot of valuable information here, and I'm really glad that we're having this conversation, because it can be a totally new space for people to navigate. How do we get into it? But going back to those things you originally mentioned, who do you know that is in therapy or has their kids in therapy? Start there and use the school as a resource, right?
Yep.
They have potentially programs and connections. I'd imagine most schools do at least have connections, if they don't have a program, that they'd be willing to help put you in touch with these different professionals in the space. And it seems like that's a great place to start. I really appreciate you sharing that and offering that guidance here. Kind of transitioning into some of the things that parents can do at home, right? You know, maybe leading up to the point where they feel their kid needs therapy, or just on a day-to-day basis with their kids, right? What are some things that parents can do to help their kids navigate maybe some of the more challenging, unpleasant emotions that they have coming up? Yeah.
Well, I think creating a time and a space for those emotions to develop or emerge or be discussed is essential. And I say this not because I feel like there's things wrong with the way we're parenting, but I know from myself, like, I dropped mealtime altogether at the dinner table. So we used to do a family meal, right? We'd all sit down, nobody had electronics, TV wasn't on, and then things got kind of crazy and we were in and out at different times, and so I let that go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after eating in front of the television set for a couple of months, I was like, I'm not hearing as much. I'm not
Mm.
seeing as much of the connection or knowing what's going on. So, creating an intentional space for those emotions to come up or be discussed, I think, is essential.
Mm-hmm.
I think kids learn best from example. So if we're on our phones all the time and we are too busy because we're taking a phone call or have to do an email, then they're going to feel like either their time isn't valued as well, or they're going to see this is okay to do and acceptable when we
Mm-hmm.
need to be discussing things. So I
Mm-hmm.
think just being conscious of the modeling aspect. And then I think the third thing I would say is that what we see in emotions in kids is really different than what it was when we were young. So while I feel it's still important to share examples of things we went through, it is not the same. Like what
Mm.
I did at 14 years old is totally different than what my child is currently doing and engaging in.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think, well, we used to walk, we'd go up to school and we'd walk about a mile and a half and go to the one fast food place that was there, and we'd hang out all afternoon. There were no cell phones. Like we were not calling anybody. My kid won't walk down to the corner store.
Right.
And some of it's safety, yes, but those things were always there. It's just a different era, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have more fear because there's more information, but at the same time too, we're more connected because there's more information, but then we're not sharing the same because there's more information.
Mm.
So I think just knowing that it's good to share your experiences, but also to know that the kids are not developing at the same rate. Like I
Mm-hmm.
watched my 13-year-old play parallel play. This is what pre-Kers do, right? So they will not be engaging together in a conversation. They're both sitting next to each other doing totally different things.
Mm.
Because we have cell phones and gaming devices in front of us, that's how they're still playing.
Mm.
So yes, they can talk to each other and have conversations, but that's not what they choose to do at this age. If they're and I would ask, are you guys, why are you doing this? Like, why
Interesting.
are you sitting next to each other but not engaging? And they're like, well, we're talking about our games in between, but we're okay.
Right.
Same thing as conversations on a phone. My kid will hit FaceTime and like be doing 8 other things, and I'll come in and I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, are you on a call? And he's like, oh yeah. I'm like, they do not want to hear
Right.
this.
Right.
But just realizing it's different and questioning those things so that they understand the why. Like, it's not always going to be like this. It's not always going to be okay to get really mad and punch your pillow, right? There are going to be settings where that's not okay.
Mm.
So, walking them through or providing the intentional space for those conversations to happen, I think that's the key.
Yeah, and I'm also hearing in your share just once again a lot of understanding from the parents' perspective of things are different, and it might be different for this parallel play. I really appreciate how you brought that up. That's something that typically happens in like preschool, but you're seeing it kind of extend into a later age group now, and that being normal and okay in a lot of ways. That it can be different and still be okay from when we grew up, or a time before, or potentially even what we ideally want our kids to see, or what we kind of expect from them. And at the same time, I think I'm hearing, the space for you to share around like, hey, it could also be fun, to go walk down the block with your friends and like,
Go
and,
outside, touch the
and
grass.
what would you call the thing? Yeah, go outside, touch the grass. What would you call the play that's more like collaborative and not parallel? Is there a
so
term for
so
that?
yeah, like engaging,
Okay.
like they're engaging together, there's
Okay.
unison in it.
Okay.
um because to me parallel is very like, you just think about parallel lines, and that's exactly what's going on. They're sitting
Right.
next to each other, their attention is focused, but if you're engaged then you're looking at it. Or directive, usually
Okay.
that's if a parent's like, we're going to go play soccer today, you have soccer practice, that's more of like directive play, right? But
Okay.
collaborative, how you said it was great, they're deciding together what they're going to
Mm-hmm.
do, how they're going to play. But I think that piece of engagement, like you can be independently engaged or you can be engaged with a partner,
Right.
or in a pair. And that's what we're really looking for some of that give and take.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that ties into a little bit of what you were talking about earlier with kids potentially being further ahead on their emotional development or a little behind on their emotional development. It's like these things are potentially happening at new paces, and the directive, the communication skills that are involved with that, the emotional regulations and coping, problem solving, all those things that are involved in actually engaging with another human being in play or just in relationship. I'd imagine those things would potentially be a little behind if we're seeing more parallel play with older kids. So like, what are some of those ways that you see developing those skills? Because obviously those are important skills to be developing and potentially bringing to the forefront. Or I guess I'm talking and I'm curious to hear your perspective on, just that specific piece of building those relationship skills.
I really like the use of group sessions in schools, and if you have a opportunity to sign your student up and they offer those at your campus, they'll sometimes they call them lunch bunch, sometimes they call them peer groups. We have some mentoring programs that are called PALs, where we will have that an older student come down from a high school to an elementary campus. I think all of those are great. Even if you have someone who you feel is a high achieving student, they're meeting all their marks, you feel confident. I think everyone can benefit from that because, as you said, it gives them the opportunity to have a discussion with somebody that maybe isn't their best friend or that they don't
Hmm.
know a lot about. And that type of conversation and interaction is not something that all kids are comfortable doing.
Right.
Right. I have one of my sons is really outspoken and the other one is more of the watcher, right? He'll draw back. Both of them have great personalities, but I push them both to do things that are socially awkward for them
Hmm.
because I feel like as an adult, that's one thing we can control, right? I cannot have given you sports aptitude, if
Right.
that's not in there. That's hard work and perseverance. I cannot control your academic success because that's your hard work and perseverance. I
Hmm.
think socially, though, I can provide you with a lot of opportunities. So groups, if they have them at school, are great because like they can be focused. So like we've had friendship ones with a group of kids that were struggling with making friends. We've had like the new kids on the block group, which are new students with
Right.
some older students that have been around on that campus. We've had executive functioning groups, kids that are struggling to get their life together in the classroom and they've got papers all over and their desks look like they exploded,
Hmm.
but they're not necessarily the best friends, the kids that hang out on the weekends or that ride their bikes around the subdivision together.
Right.
So it puts them in a situation where they have to talk about things that aren't necessarily comfortable,
Hmm.
right? They have to admit things that maybe they want to improve on or that they could do better at, and
Hmm.
that develops their self-awareness, which we're
Right.
not a
Hmm.
big society on reflection.
Mm.
We're big on mirroring and pushing outward,
Mm.
right? But so that's a different exposure for the kids. And I think, like, I love that there are so many, we're an ethnically diverse area, and so we have a
Hmm.
lot of cultural groups, and a lot of with that ethnicity comes family groupings, right? So
Hmm.
cousins and aunts and uncles and grandmas, and so we have multi-generational groups that get together
Right.
for social events. And while that is wonderful, that is completely different than being with friends that you don't know anything about or what you share in common,
Right.
right? So we do a lot more, especially after COVID, a lot more family stuff because that's safer and protected, and
Hmm.
a lot less of let's go to the park and play with a bunch of kids that we don't know, which is like what we would do, right? Your parents take
Right.
you up to the park, you just run around with whoever's up there.
Right.
So we changed mentally for good reason because we had to go into protection mode, but I think too we don't expose them to that a lot, right? In
Hmm.
school, they're grouped with kids, sometimes the same class, multiple years, the same group
Right.
of kids,
Hmm.
because of the way our school system is set up, right? They academically group kids together based on needs or based on when they have to get pulled out for specialized programs like
Hmm.
GT or if they're a 504. So they do that for logistics, right? Sometimes
Right.
that's the same group of kids. So, whatever exposure you can get them into, I think multiple ages, same age, but different groups,
Right.
outside of the familial grouping, but then also having that experience too.
Right.
It's really exposure.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hearing, that it gets to be this whole variety, and if your kid's not potentially getting some of that growth in almost like experience with strangers or just different people outside their group, well then that could be a challenge point for them moving forward or making new friends, or if you guys move, like you're building a skill set
Mm-hmm.
through the exposure is what I'm hearing in there, which is
Yeah.
really powerful stuff. And I really appreciate just the invitation to go out there and get a little uncomfortable, right? Try some new things out, and especially I'd imagine if your kid is really comfortable and is excelling in their own friend group or family
Mm-hmm.
group, this is then could potentially be in reflecting on what you're saying, like the next step in their social development. How are we transitioning now into more different groups?
Yep.
And
And when we look at it like that, we want, in our mind, or in my mind at least, like I want a well-rounded child, right? For everyone. I want kids to feel like in school, if nothing else, they've got experiences that equipped them to make the choices that they're going to need to in their future, right? Because
hmm
that's our job, is to produce productive adults in society, right? and and I think sometimes, because we have so many changes that maybe the educational system hasn't caught up with, like electronics, social media, the use of those things, the exposure. I mean, I think to what my kids know, and I say that in quotes because they don't have the knowledge of it, they're watching something
right,
that's
they have the
telling them this
information.
happens. They're
Yeah.
right. And so we haven't caught up with that, right? The educational system has not gone to meet them. What they need to do for problem solving, Chat GPT takes away a quarter of that, right? And that's
Right.
going to continue to grow. So
hmm
instead of saying let's block it or let's remove it, what can we do to better equip them to handle it and make the good choices, right? And
hmm
I that's again that exposure to making them feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. We
Right.
got away from that. We started protecting. There's a whole generation, if you read like parenting blogs, or even in when you learn about the mental makeup of parenting roles and hierarchies within the families, there's a parenting style that does not want to tell their children no and doesn't want their kid to get hurt. And
hmm
that to me is the scariest thing ever. And I get it. Look,
Right.
Mama Bear has come out many a times, especially if a kid said something mean to my son. What?
Right.
So I get it, but they have to be pushed to be uncomfortable. Not all the time and not in everything that they do, but they have
Right.
to experience that. And then I would just suggest as a parent that you're there to help them discuss it afterwards. Okay, what
Right.
went wrong with this?
Yeah.
Why did it make you feel this way? Okay, what do you think we could do different next time? We
hmm
might not try it again for 6 months,
Right.
but we still need to try it again because it's not going to go away. And I'm
Right.
not saying with everything in life doesn't need to be like that. Like, you're going to have a kid that's got sensory issues and is never going to eat, broccoli in their life. I'm not
Right.
saying shove the broccoli in their face every time, but
hmm
things like friendships,
hmm
things like getting upset, things like dealing with disappointment, things like not coming in first, second, or third, or getting an award.
Right.
Those things are all developmental, that one, they need the exposure to, two, we're not doing them any favors coming in and protecting them from that
Right.
failure or that
Right.
growth, right? Because we need to do our job as a community of parents and educators and helpers to be there to say, okay, what can we do next time?
Right. And you brought that up a little bit earlier, and I'm really happy that it kind of circled back around that idea of reflection. And that's what I'm hearing, opportunities for them to reflect by themselves with it, but also to be there as their parent, as their guide, a friend, even in that moment of just like, hey, let's reflect on this. What can we do differently? What went well? What did I enjoy? What can I learn? What did I grow? And it seems like a lot of the questions you're sharing are around that growth mindset idea of like, okay, this is going to keep coming up, right? In one way or another, there's going to be failure. There's going to be sadness. There's going to be moments of upset. How are we navigating this? And those I can totally see. And I'm really happy we're having this conversation of those are the opportunities for growth,
Mm-hmm.
and with protection, you don't really get that. So they kind of stay
Yep.
stuck.
Yep.
But Jennifer, just as we wrap up here, is there any like one last thing that you want to share with parents that maybe we haven't discussed today that's on your heart, to get out there as advice, encouragement, anything at all?
I really want to encourage parents to utilize the resources that their school provides. Each school, no matter where they're located in any state, is going to have someone that you and your child can sit down with and discuss. And in some cases, if they don't have a counselor on campus, that may be a social worker that works for the district. And I know just the name social worker sometimes throws people off. It is never meant to be a negative experience. They are there to provide resources and people you can talk to, and different Maybe it's just being a mediator between you and a teacher if that's where the
Hmm.
student is struggling in a class. So just being aware that the school is a warehouse of support.
Right.
And, that's what we have a mission to do that and provide that for our kids.
Hmm.
Your academic teachers are there to help, but they're there to also teach the curriculum, but there are other people
Right.
within the school system that I encourage parents to reach out to and know that it does not come with judgment, because
Right.
I think that as a counselor in a school, that's the hardest thing that I've had to face, is that I'm here to help and I'm offering help and suggestions. And unfortunately, some people choose not to take that because they're in fear of being judged. I'm
Hmm.
never going to say, somebody's a bad parent. I had to go to the pediatrician and say, yes, my kids are on more than 2 hours a day, and no, they don't eat healthy.
Yep.
So
Hmm.
I'm there in the trenches. So I just want people to know that's a safe place to reach out for assistance in whatever form you need. And it may not be provided from the school, but they can hook you up with resources within the community that can service your needs.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for all of this, for that suggestion as well. Thank you, everybody who gave this episode a listen here. If you want, feel free to reach out to us. Free to reach out to Jennifer. Is there any place that people can get in touch with you easily, Jennifer?
Yep, I'm on LinkedIn, and it's Jen Russell, and then it's got Tremblay, which is my maiden name in parentheses. And then I'll give you my email. It's jennifer.russell, Russell, at lcisd.org. I'd love to have anybody reach out.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you all once again for your time, and Jennifer especially. Thank you.
Thank you.